This episode of the Executive Discussion Series features Mr. Dayo Olaide. Mr. Olaide is an accomplished development specialist and a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Nigeria. He has more than 25 years of experience in the development sector as an accountant, resource mobilization expert, program management, advocacy, and mentoring. He is the Deputy Director of the MacArthur Foundation. In that role, he manages a portfolio of grants to strengthen investigative journalism, administration of criminal justice, and the use of behavioral insights in the Foundation's program focused on helping Nigeria reduce corruption. Mr. Olaide started his career as a project accountant for the Civil Liberties Organization in 1995 and rose to become the head of CLO's Resource Mobilization Unit, a position he combined with the position of accountant until he left in 2007. Later in 2007, he joined the Open Society Initiative West Africa, OSIWA. He was the head of OSIWA Nigeria office and helped to support the birth of the very first civil society election situation room in 2011, which became a success and a template for coordinated engagement of civil society and broader non-state actor groups in elections planning and management. He relocated to OSIWA's regional headquarters in Dakar, Senegal, as regional manager. When he returned to Nigeria in 2013, he joined the Nigeria Stability and Reconciliation Program, a 5-year DFID-funded program jointly managed by British Council, International Alert, and Social Development Direct. Mr. Olaide holds an MBA in Finance from Olabisi Onabanjo University, an MA in Development Studies with a major in Public Policy and Management from the International Institute of Social Studies in the Netherlands. He has attended several leadership development and policy reform programs, including at the prestigious Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Allow me to introduce you to Mr. Dayo Olaide.
It's going live. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Efwa Elens-Edeh with Social Impact Consulting. Thank you for hanging in there with us. As I promised, I am here with Mr. Dayo Olaide, the Deputy Director of MacArthur Foundation, a seasoned development expert. You will see his bio on the column of the post. So we are just so lucky and blessed to have him here to just give us some insights on the civic space globally and nationally and how we're coping with COVID-19. The big two words, COVID-19. So thank you so much, Mr. Olaide, for joining us. Thank you for joining us. So can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So my first question to you is, how did MacArthur Foundation respond to the pandemic? It was a shock to all of us. So how did you all respond to it?
The foundation was very quick to actually acknowledge the danger and therefore mobilize responses from across the world. In Chicago, where our headquarters is actually based, we were able to quickly respond. Some of the responses included that we joined hands with more than 30 independent foundations to put in place resources to help distressed communities, particularly the Black communities, who are seen as being disproportionately affected. The foundation made resources available to the country offices. In Nigeria, we got some resources, about $500,000 was given to each of the country offices, Nigeria, India.
Hello? Hello?
And Mexico. The idea Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Right. So the foundation made resources available to all the country offices, in addition to what it was also contributing in Chicago. And each country offices was also encouraged to make. In
It looks
our
like we have
case,
some issues with the network. Okay.
Now, in our case in Nigeria, we reached out to all our grantees, and we had quite a number of them, making very robust interventions,
Okay.
very quickly, because
Okay.
there are quite a number of things that we acknowledge that grantees and our offices acknowledged as posing the biggest challenge at that, at
Okay.
different times in the pandemic. At a
Okay.
point, the most important thing was the need to actually get people to know what the pandemic meant, to know the risk exposure, and then to also be able to conduct themselves in the most appropriate ways. And so we had grantees who developed communication materials that were aired on radio, on television. We had grantees who started, also tracking some of the resources that was being contributed by government. We had grantees who immediately initiated responses to protect women that were facing a higher level of violence as a result of being locked in-house.
Really?
Oh, yes. We've seen a spike in human rights violations, especially, gender-based violation as a result of the lockdown. And we had quite a number of our grantees who are basically calling government out in terms of what structures government had put in place, isolation centers, the adequacy, the treatment of people that were confirmed cases. So we had a range of responses from our grantees that looked at both, in terms of whether it's sensitizing the public, it's about monitoring what government was doing, responding to questions from the public, even something similar to what we are having this afternoon. Grantees have been awesome in all of these different areas.
Okay, that's quite comprehensive. Thank you so much for that, sir. So I want to segue into how the foundation has worked with its grantees here in Nigeria in terms of trying to work with government to cope with managing the spread. So this would be a two-part question. And as the government is trying to transition into slowly opening up the economy, how are you working with your grantees to manage that in terms of their team, their welfare, and then at the same time working with government to make sure we're able to still manage the spread?
So I think that one thing is clear to us and our grantees, and that is that individuals and households are the most important line of defense in coping and checking the spread of this virus. And so our emphasis has been on reaching the man on the streets, educating our family members to be able to do the right thing.
Yeah.
We also acknowledge the role of government in all of this.
Yes.
Leadership plays a critical role in responding to the virus. And so part of what we have also encouraged our grantees to do is to support government and partner with government in every way that is possible. Of course, that's not to say that we are refusing our grantees the opportunity to, at the same time, be able to call out government where violations have taken place, where we suspect that resources are likely to be mismanaged, or where we suspect that government response to the virus is inadequate. So we're doing all of that I think both as a foundation, but also in our individual capacities. One of the most important contributions from our grantees, for example, has been the countering disinformation about the virus.
Okay.
At the very initial stage, a lot of people felt the virus is just a rich man's problem. It is affecting only the politicians. We've had to get one of our grantees, actually is now a cohort of grantees that are working on countering disinformation, because the disinformation poses probably a huge, one of the biggest challenges to government's response or government's attempt to respond to this. Even if government were to have the most sophisticated response, to the problem, we need to have communities, we need to have households know that this virus makes no differentiation between young or old, Muslims or Christians, rich or poor.
Yes.
So we are working with our grantees to counter a lot of misinformation and disinformation that you have there. And that is helping to actually get people to behave more responsibly. Now, in terms of what we are then doing in terms of the lockdown, one of the things that we have, the releasing of the lockdown, one of the things that we have sent to our grantees is every grantee should have a plan for responding to the easing of the lockdown.
Okay.
Government is not easing the lockdown because the situation has significantly improved. The easing of the lockdown is responding to both political pressure and the economic realities that we find ourselves. And so our one important message to all grantees is you should have a plan in place to guide your office reopening. We have already, some of our grantees have already reached out to us to ask if we will be opening office on Monday. We have already communicated to them that no, we will be monitoring the situation. And even if the situation, as the situation improves, we are not we don't expect a situation where all staff will return to the office at the same time. So it's going to be a gradual thing. Those who have vehicles, for example, and who are considered as essential may become the first to return to the office. It's the same thing that we are encouraging our grantees. Look at your staff composition. Look at their roles in the office. If there are those that can continue to work from home, please let them continue to work from home. If there are those that need to be in the office because of the essential duties that they will have to do, for example, go to court, then you can consider allowing them. So that's part of what we are suggesting to them. We are also proposing to them that even when you return to office, right, you should continue to observe the current protocol. Distancing, make sure you put in place the hand washing rules. Sanitizers are distributed generously. That you do not begin to hold meetings, large meetings in your office. You do not begin to entertain visitors in the office. All of this has to be a gradual thing. So I guess the short response to this will be that we are advising, just as we are also observing on our own part, a gradual, slow, and methodical return to normalcy.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. That was quite comprehensive. Now, like I mentioned before, nobody expected this pandemic to come the way it did this year. So how has this affected not just the MacArthur Foundation, but the donor climate in terms of your strategic plan? In terms of, okay, these were our plans, and now this has pretty much curtailed it, not a bit, but a whole lot. So what are the conversations, not just you, but with your colleagues, on how you all plan to adapt and that going down to your grantees?
You're absolutely correct that the pandemic is a shock to
Mm-hmm.
a lot of strategies. A lot of strategies never anticipated this. And the reason why I think every foundation had to be nimble, flexible, and quick in responding to the situation. The resources that we have made available is just one of such immediate response. There are ongoing conversations within the foundation, and I'm sure across the donor, the donor communities generally. We don't know for how long this pandemic may be with us.
Yes.
We don't know for how long the lockdown may be with us. And so a lot of the activities that would normally require bringing people together is being discouraged right now.
Okay.
Those that can happen online, we're encouraging them to happen. All right. So grantees are having a deep reflection. They are having, most of them are having to resort to online meetings to be able to work out how best to deliver on their obligations to the foundation. But as a foundation as well, we're also having that team reflections. And so we meet regularly and we are asking questions such as, how might this pandemic affect the long-term implementation of our strategy, of our projects? The good thing for us is that we just came out of a strategy review. So we are actually at a point where we are finalizing, a refresh of our strategy. And COVID-19 has been at the center of it all. So at the moment, the focus of the foundation which began over the last 5 years, has been on how to help Nigeria reduce corruption. And so some of the questions we are asking ourselves are, how might COVID-19, for example, affect the economic structure that you have in place, for managing Nigeria's resources? What might, this is an emergency situation. And as an emergency situation, you are seeing new rules being put in place that may circumvent rules of transparency, procurement, accountability. What might that mean for our own kind of work? What might that mean for grantees? We are having such reflections. We work with investigative journalists who are being supported to be able to do investigative work on corruption. What might COVID-19 mean in terms of the civic space for them? These are questions that we're asking ourselves. The criminal justice cohort of our work is essentially aimed at strengthening the implementation of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015. Now, what might that mean in terms of court proceedings? We're seeing courts begin to talk about, consider online court sittings as well. Now, I think that has already happened in Borno State, for example. I think a lot more states are beginning to think about. So COVID-19 is affecting practically everything. It's affecting, it's an health issue, it's an education issue, it's a security issue, it's a criminal justice issue, it's a food security issue. And so foundations are having to think about all of these different dimensions and their implications for their strategy.
Okay, so now, since you all are pivoting based on the situational analysis that you just mentioned, how do you feel like your partners can be ready? Even as you are working with current partners and hopefully inviting new partners to come on board, how can they get themselves ready for this new shift in implementation because of COVID-19?
I think that I would say we are already in the process of doing that. Because what has happened in the last 1 month plus 6 weeks or thereabout, is that it's exactly what you are talking about. Grantees having to take a step back, have a look at their contracts, their grant contracts, and having to come back to the foundation to make requests for repurposing, to be able to become more responsive and relevant under the current situation. Now, one of the things that we are hoping will happen is that as the days unfold, all right, it becomes clearer in terms of long-term strategic changes that would need to happen in grants and in grant contracts. Right now, I think a lot of the changes that have taken place are in the short term to the immediate responses that is needed to prevent the spread, to save lives, to support government, to educate the public. I think all of that has happened over the last 6 weeks. But we are expecting to see a situation where, as things unfold, we begin to think more medium term to long term as well. To then ask the question, what more structural changes or strategic changes needs to happen in the contracts that they have with the foundation? And I think it's the same thing that the foundation will also be thinking in terms of its own long-term strategy.
Okay, so that's pretty much in terms of what I was thinking about. So, for example, where do you think the civic space can go from here? Like, for example, now the COVID-19, a lot of people had to just stay indoors and be safe, which is the fundamental fact. And I spoke to the guest speaker yesterday, and she also made an observation about people pivoting into humanitarian work, some civil society. So what lessons do you think civil society organizations can learn from something like this? Like, MacArthur could pivot quickly. What do you think civil society, the civic space, can learn from what has happened now?
I'll take that question in two parts.
Okay.
On the one hand is to look at how donors and civil society groups have worked before now. I think one major lesson that we are seeing as a result of the pandemic is the need for greater collaboration and coordination among civil society groups on the one hand, but also donor organizations on the other hand. My hope will be that moving forward, we are going to see even closer collaboration taking place between donor organizations talking to one another more, sharing information more, thinking about joint interventions more, thinking about how to work more organically in a way that the work of one can serve as the stepping stone to the other. So more of optimizing our strength and resources and reach and knowledge. I think a lot more of that would have to begin to happen as we move forward. That's on the one part, and on the other part is to then say that this type of situation happens once in a lifetime. The pandemic situation has shown to us, to all of us, that even the most sophisticated organization cannot alone manage a pandemic.
Yes.
And that the space, therefore, becomes an important part of our programming. So the civic space as an entity, I don't mean the players there now, the civic space as an entity becomes an important part of our programming. My hope will be that moving forward, foundations will also begin to think beyond the functional support that they give to to address institutional challenges in the health sector, in the education sector, that we will begin to invest more in strengthening and protecting the civic space.
I
And when I
see.
say the civic space, I mean, I'm talking about the rules that
Mm-hmm.
guide, civil society
Mm-hmm.
operations, whether it's in terms of receiving
Mm-hmm.
funds, is in
Mm-hmm.
terms of collaboration, is in terms of
Mm-hmm.
being regulated. I
Mm-hmm.
think more and more of donor organizations will have to begin to invest in the civic space, because emergency situations increases the risk that
Yes.
the civic space faces. You
Yes.
have disinformation that are targeted at disrupting the civic space.
Mm-hmm.
You have targeted attacks on specific organizations or institutions that are considered to be too vocal, targeted attacks on
Mm-hmm.
activists. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that is something that moving forward is, for me, is one of the lessons. And then the other important lesson is also that we need to find a way as donors to
Mm-hmm.
bridge the gap between
Mm-hmm.
our grantees and
Mm-hmm.
the public,
I
the
see.
Nigerian public.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we are seeing as posing the biggest risk to our response capability to the COVID is the distance, the distrust that we have between citizens and
Mm-hmm.
government, and then the distance that we have between a lot of our civil society groups and the ordinary citizens out there.
Yes.
We need to find more creative ways of
Mm-hmm.
bridging that gap, so
I
that
see.
when we support civil society, NGOs,
Mm-hmm.
as the mouthpiece for citizens, we are
Mm-hmm.
actually we are truly supporting them to mobilize, that they have that connection with communities, with professional associations,
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
households.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the long-term benefit of development sector, we would
Yes.
need to think more creatively about how we make that connection between our grantees as civil society organizations, as community-based associations, community-based organizations, and the actual beneficiaries of their interventions. And I think it's the same that must apply to government. If government were to be more trusted, I think a lot of the pressure that they are facing and pushback that they are experiencing from citizens regarding the lockdown and
Yes.
the duration of the lockdown, maybe that will have been different, and that will have also meant that government is able to work, with less distractions. But right now,
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge trust deficit, which
Yes.
affects
Definitely.
society and government engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Huge trust deficit, which
Mm-hmm.
affects citizens' support for government interventions, even when such interventions actually is meant to help them. I think that's something that we need to begin to pay more attention to moving forward.
Yeah, that was quite comprehensive, sir, in terms of really, and you went into detail in terms of strengthening the civic space, and that if the civic space was more strengthened, then there would be even a flow of information between the grantees, the public, and how the flow of communication would be going in terms of how to even better prepare for something like this. So that was quite comprehensive. So my final question to you is this: as a donor, how do you think a civil society organization, a non-profit, can stay relevant in a situation like this? God forbid, should
Sorry.
it present itself again? So how can they be more relevant? Because some civil society organizations, some NGOs have really become a voice, and some have been dormant as a result of the stay-at-home order. So how can a nonprofit remain relevant at this point?
I think we can look at relevance from a number of views.
Mm-hmm.
Relevance in terms of your ability to be able to deliver your obligations to your
Mm-hmm.
target stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
So if, for example, you are an NGO that is committed to promoting girls' secondary education, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Your relevance will be measured on the basis of your ability to be able to get more girls out of the streets, more girls
Mm-hmm.
saved from early marriage and getting
Mm-hmm.
them to school, keep more girls
Mm-hmm.
in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can also look at relevance in terms of your ability not just to meet your core objectives, but your nimbleness, your ability to be able to respond to situations
Mm-hmm.
as they arise. So,
Yes.
for example, going back to that same example, your core goal is to get more girls into school, but suddenly there is a
Yes.
pandemic. Your relevance can also be the extent to which you are able to respond to the pandemic in a way that helps you to reduce the effect of the pandemic on your primary target group, which in this
I
case
see.
are the girls. So
Mm-hmm.
we can look at relevance in that way, but we can also look at relevance in terms of your ability to be able to respond to the national interest of the country. I think
I
if we
see.
look at all of that, for me,
Mm-hmm.
non-profit organizations need
Mm-hmm.
to be vigilant. If you
Mm-hmm.
must be relevant, you need to be vigilant. You
Mm-hmm.
need to be responsive. A lot of our grantees, we didn't even have to wait for a call from us before taking actions to respond to COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
One of such is the MacArthur Foundation. They did a fantastic set of skits, 1 minute skits that basically seeks to educate, the Nigerian public. We were amazed, at the speed of their response to such.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's relevance. Relevance is also acknowledging the fact that situations as they change requires you to also change in your response and in your approach. So organizations that, for example, had planned several meetings, in contact meetings, suddenly realize we no longer can do those in contact meetings. We have to put those on hold, and instead we need to begin to create new ways of getting achieving our goals. So it's about being flexible. It's
Okay.
about being vigilant. It's about being responsive. It's about being responsible. I think all of those really will make NGOs continue to be relevant under the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was really, really rich in terms of talking about how the donor community, MacArthur Foundation, adjusted to the news of the pandemic and really looked and really had a comprehensive strategy on how to work with grantees, and then also just talking about increasing what could lessons learned from this and what could be done in the future to address, God forbid, should this happen again, in terms of increasing the viability of the civic space and how NGOs can be relevant even during the COVID pandemic and not really having an idea on when this is going to end. So thank you so much for your insight. This gives us a lot more knowledge on how NGOs can really become strengthened and how the civic space can become strengthened moving forward. So thank you so much, sir, for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Eddie.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elens-Edeh with Social Impact Consulting. I'm a development consultant with 20 years of experience working with NGOs, international NGOs, and bilateral agencies to work in project support, monitoring and evaluation, and civil society strengthening. So now, I saw that local NGOs lack the capacity to manage large-scale projects, which can in turn impact their various communities because they have the connection based on their backgrounds. So this made me create this channel so that I can add value to you for free once you subscribe to this channel and get notified of upcoming videos. I look forward to hearing from you.